Hi, Kim here at Wild Hearts and Wildflowers, and today I'm excited to bring you a video that's going to share all sorts of cozy books with you. Cozy books from all different genres. Now, in my last video, I shared cozy mysteries, and I highlighted all sorts of different themes, different premises, different settings, and I think that was a lot of fun. These were different series I've read over the last 20 years. So if you're at all interested in learning all sorts of different cozy mystery categories, well then go check out that video. But today's going to be different. Although some of these books have mystery elements to them, most of them focus on completely different genres. Now, how am I defining these books as cozy? With cozy mysteries, it's pretty easy because there are three firm rules when it comes to classifying a mystery as cozy. Number one, the sleuth needs to be an amateur. Number two, you need to have a small town setting, or at least the feel of a small town. So if it's set in, say, New York City, which I have one favorite cozy mystery series that is, it needs to still feel like a small town. So the area or the business, the friendship community that it's set in needs to feel like that small town vibe. So amateur sleuth, small town vibe. And the third requirement for cozy mystery is that there's no graphic violence. Obviously no graphic sex either. But graphic violence, you might think it would have, right, in a mystery, but in a cozy mystery, all of that happens off page. You hear about it, but you don't see anything, and you don't hear too much about it. So how am I defining cozy when it comes to all these other genres? Well, I went to the Oxford Dictionary, and the definition of cozy is basically something that brings us a feeling of comfort, warmth, and relaxation. We feel safe there, and we're able to relax, enjoy ourselves, and feel very comfortable. So I have 10 categories of cozy books for you. Let me list the first 7, and then we'll talk about the last 3. Cozy sci-fi, 2 subgenres of cozy sci-fi, cozy time travel, and cozy post-apocalyptic. I didn't think I'd find one of those, but I discovered a series that fits that to a T last month. Then we've got cozy contemporary romance, cozy witchy, and cozy classics. And of course, we can't forget cozy fantasy. Now, categories 8 through 10, well, they're a little different. 8 is blends. So I have 3 series that are very much blends of different genres, but all together, they turn out very cozy. And then categories 9 and 10, I'm actually doing separate videos about. So the 9th one is cozy nonfiction, and the 10th one is cozy Christmas books. So first up, cozy sci-fi. If you haven't read Becky Chambers, you need to right now. She is just so amazing. Now, she's best known for her 4-book Wayfarers series. Now, this series, when I first read it, definitely reminded me of the show Firefly. If you have seen that, you know the basic premise then. And Becky Chambers definitely has hints of that in here, but she takes it to a whole nother level, much, much higher level, or deeper, depending on how you look at it. But Becky Chambers knows how to write science fiction, and she knows how to write cozy, and the blend of those 2 elements is so excellent. One thing Becky does super well is character development. Whether it's human or alien, you feel like you really get to know these characters, you identify with them, you sympathize with them, you learn from them, and you care about what happens to them, so you want to keep reading. Now, I will point out that these 4 books in the Wayfarers series, they're all set within the same universe, and different characters show up within the different books, but they're not a typical, sequential series. So you can actually read them out of order, and that's not a problem, but I would recommend reading them in order, the order she wrote them. She built the universe deeper and deeper as she went, I feel like. Now, the books in the Wayfarers series are, number 1, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Number 2, A Closed and Common Orbit. Number 3, Record of a Spaceborne Few. And number 4, The Galaxy and the Ground Within. I'm currently rereading this series and enjoying it just as much, if not more so, than the first time I read it. I can only hope that very soon Becky Chambers writes a 5th. Now, something else that Becky Chambers does wonderfully well is the science in her books. Partially, this is because she's such a great researcher and writer, but also because her mother is an astrobiologist, a consultant for NASA and many other national and I believe even international organizations. So her mother has always been her scientific consultant in the sense that she bounces ideas off her mom. She lets her mother read what she's written and, give her hints or advice as to what she might want to develop more or question doing. And it's apparently worked out to be a wonderful relationship for the two of them. In fact, in the independent novella that Becky Chambers wrote and published in 2019, entitled To Be Taught If Fortunate, which I absolutely love that book. That novella has at the end of it a discussion where Becky asks her mother, and in turn her mother asks her several questions about the interplay between science fiction, and the reality of science and space exploration. It was very interesting to see what these two intelligent, creative people had to say about how they see science fiction influencing science and science influencing science fiction, and how that affects writers and scientists. So apparently they did this discussion live around the publication of that novella, but now it's included in the back of the novella, even in the ebook form, which I read. So I encourage you to definitely get a hold of To Be Taught If Fortunate, which is an interesting quote that you will, once you read the book, discover where that comes from. Now, that novella is set in the 22nd century, and it follows 4 astronauts as they are light years away and exploring 4 what has been discovered to be habitable planets, and they're there doing a sort of ecological surveying. And the science of that time has advanced to the point where they are able to do this thing called somaforming, where the astronauts will go into a deep, long sleep, torpor, to, let them travel these long distances. And while they're traveling, their body, their DNA will transform them a bit, supplement them, really, biological supplementation. So in other words, it might give them their skin the ability to absorb more radiation and not take on damage. Little things like that. Now, I don't want to spoil anything, give too much away, but I was just enthralled with this little novella. It's only about 155 pages, and yet it feels like it's much longer, and not in a bad way. It's a very medium-paced book, really, but it's contemplative and reflective and yet exciting. And I can't wait to just read it again. I wish there would be a sequel, but there probably kind of can't be. But the ending is still very good. And I didn't know how it could be, but Chambers managed it. And you might be wondering, how is this little novella with only 4 people in it? How does it work as a cozy read? Oh, it's very cozy. And not because they're just in this little tiny, space module. They're not. They do land on these planets, and they have the ability to put out and set up a greenhouse and a lab. So they're not enclosed in a tiny space at all times. But these 4 people are family at this point, and it does have a very somehow comforting feel, and I can see myself rereading it every year probably. Now, as to Becky Chambers' other series, it's also so good. These also are novellas. The first is A Psalm for the Wild Built, and the second is A Prayer for the Crowned Shy. And together, these 2 books make up the Monk and Robot duology. I do think and hope that Chambers will put out more books in this series, but it is not the exciting action-packed series that the Wayfarers series is, which are full-length novels that are what you would more typically expect of sci-fi, except their character development is much richer. But these two books are set in a calm and happy and well thought out, organized, post-apocalyptic world. And it is the friendship that develops between a monk, a tea monk, and a robot. Now, humans and robots have not interacted since the apocalypse. It's been a couple hundred years. But, well, they meet up, these two beings, and they do develop a friendship. And there is a lot of thoughtful interaction going on here. And I just really enjoyed every bit of it. It's just a wonderfully cozy, enjoyable read. Both books are. And I highly recommend them, as well as all of Becky Chambers' work, both now and in the future. The other cozy science fiction author and series that I highly recommend is Mary Robinette Kowal's Lady Astronaut series. And this is book 1, The Calculating Stars. I discovered this series earlier this year. Now, I'd heard of it before, but I hadn't got around to reading it. My bad, because these were wonderful. At the moment, it's a trilogy, although there are a few associated short stories. So book 2 is The Faded Sky, and book 3 is The Relentless Moon. And then in March, book 4 is The Martian Contingency. Now, book 4.5, which I read a few months ago because it's already out and I loved it, is called The Lady Astronaut of Mars. Now, this science fiction series is speculative history as well. It is set in 1952, or that is when it starts. And what happens is a meteorite hits the Earth, obliterates most of the East Coast, including Washington, D.C. and NASA. It affects the whole world, and more than in just the initial cataclysmic event, in the sense that afterwards, of course, everything climate-wise changes, and the scientists figure out very quickly that the Earth's days are numbered, as in humanity is not going to be able to live on Earth much longer. So this radically, exponentially has to speed up the space race. Now, Elma York is the protagonist of the first and second book in this series, and Elma is a former WASP pilot, a physicist, a mathematician, and a loving wife. Now, her husband is a very high leader in the International Aerospace Coalition that forms, and together they and a lot of other invested, intelligent, determined people go about trying to make this work. And at first, Elma is a computer, which we become familiarized with that term from the Hidden Figures popularity, the book and the movie. But as time goes by, she realizes that she and some of the other women with her background and experience can be just as useful, if not more so, than the male astronauts that are being considered for the flights to space. This series definitely has a cozy feel to it. All of the women involved, as well as the men, form this very bonded community striving for a common goal. And there are even, as time goes by, some adverse forces coalescing on Earth that maybe think we should be paying more attention to the Earth rather than outer space. And they don't see why all the money and effort is going into the space program when it could be working to try to help the people on Earth. And it's very interesting, but at the same time, it's very hopeful. That's what I found, and a lot of other people have too. So if you haven't read this series, I highly suggest you try it out. So moving on to cozy fantasy. Now, I don't read a ton of fantasy, but I do enjoy some of it, especially cozy fantasy. Now, everyone's probably heard of Legends and Lattes and its sequel, and I have to admit I haven't read it yet. My daughter who's read it absolutely loves it, so I do intend to read it, but I can't tell you anything about it except that I know it's really cozy and I know a lot of people very much like it. However, I do have a few books I can't wait to share with you in this category. First up, a classic if there ever was one, And forgive the old battered look of this book, but it is much loved and much read. Apparently much chewed on by a toddler too. And that is The Princess Bride. Now, you may have only watched the movie. If you have, you know how good the story is. But if you haven't read this book by William Goldman, then you have not truly experienced The Princess Bride. The narrative voice in this book is insanely funny and takes you on a whole new experience. And it's a wonderful experience. So the first time I read this book, I didn't actually read it myself. My oldest daughter, when she was about 15 or 16 at the most, read this book aloud to me when we were doing her college tour. And we were driving cross country from California back east and going around to all the colleges that had accepted her. And she needed to see them firsthand to decide where to go. And it was, tiring. We were trying to do it without stopping. And actually, she didn't drive at the time. I think she was 15 because she went off to college when she was 16. And so she was a history major to be. She actually has a PhD in history now, and she loved history from the time she was a baby, basically. But she also loved stories of all kinds. So yeah, she read this book aloud to me. What's hilarious is that neither one of us had any idea what was coming when she started reading. And at first we were like, what? What? But before long, we were laughing out loud. It is so good. So that's all I'm going to say, really. If you like the Princess Bride movie, and if you don't, have you watched it? But if you liked it and you haven't read this book, you need to read this book now. All right, the next book I just discovered a couple weeks ago, and I bought it immediately because I couldn't not buy it. And it's called This Will Be Fun by E.B. Asher. Let me just read you the synopsis of this book. Former friends, former flames, a mayhem-spiked quest. What could go wrong? Everyone in Mithria knows the story of how best friends Beatrice and Elwyn, handsome ex-bandit Claire, and valiant leader Galwell the Great defended the realm from darkness. It's a tale beloved by all, except the heroes. They haven't spoken in a decade, devastated by what their quest cost them. But when they all receive an invitation to the Queen of Mithria's wedding, it's a summons they can't refuse, and a reunion for the ages, with Claire secretly not over his long-ago fling with Beatrice, Beatrice fighting the guilt she feels over how everything ended, Elwyn unprepared for the return of her ex-love, the cunning Vandra, and all of them lost without Galwell. And if reuniting with former friends and lovers wasn't perilous enough, dark forces from their past have also returned. Dusting off old weapons and old instincts, Beatrice, Claire, and Elwyn will face undead nemesis, crystal caves, enchanted swords, coffee shops, games of magical truth or dare, and hardest of all, their past, rife with wounds never healed and romances never forgotten. This time around, will their story end in happily ever after? When I read that, it just stirred up all my wonderful nostalgic feelings for The Princess Bride. And even though this is not a technical sequel to The Princess Bride, it kind of feels like it is in a way. And my heart can't wait to read it. Now, the other cozy fantasy series I want to recommend to you is Rebecca Thorne's Can't Spell Treason Without Tea, and its sequel, A Pirate's Life for Tea. Now, this is definitely a cozy fantasy. All Raina and Cantha want is to open a bookshop that serves tea, while firelight drifts between the rafters. But Raina works as one of the Queen's private guards, and Cantha is the most powerful mage in existence. Leaving their lives isn't so easy, but after an assassin takes Raina hostage, she decides she's thoroughly done risking her life for a self-centered queen. Meanwhile, Cantha has been waiting for a chance to flee responsibility, so all the better that her girlfriend is on board. Together, they settle in Tawny, a town nestled in the icy tundra near Dragon Country, and they open the shop of their dreams. What follows is a cozy tale of mishaps, mysteries, and a murderous queen throwing the realm's biggest temper tantrum while these two women discover just what they mean to each other and to the world. So this series, which I know already has a third and fourth book lined up coming out soon, is another one you can cuddle up and enjoy this winter. On to category 3, and that's cozy romance. Now, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't read a lot of romance, although I do appreciate some romance sprinkled in with the genres I do read. But I don't know, December and January, I always feel like I do want a little bit of romance. Usually I read Christmas romance and maybe some historical romance. But I did happen upon a cozy contemporary romance author that I absolutely love. Now, I was looking for a specific book by this author to give as a gift. I was looking for The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary for one of my kids because I thought they would love it. It received so many great accolades, and what it was being praised for, I thought they would really love. But when I went to the bookstore, I couldn't find that book. I did, however, find another one by Beth O'Leary. It was called The Switch. I sat down to have a coffee, read a few pages, and see what kind of a writer she actually is. And oh my goodness, I was hooked. 10 minutes later, I took the book home with me, read it all in the next 2 hours, and loved it. So this is a book about a grandmother who's about to turn 80 and her 20-something, I think she's about 28-year-old granddaughter. So we have Eileen, the grandma, and Lena, named after her, the granddaughter. The granddaughter is a workaholic, overachieving gal in London, and the grandmother lives in Yorkshire. And well, Lena is told, you need to take a 2-month sabbatical. You haven't taken a vacation in years and you're overworked and burned out, and we value you too much to let this go on. So you have to take 2 months off. Meanwhile, Eileen, the grandma, well, finally she's in the mood for some romance. Her husband of many long years had left her a few years before, but now she's looking around thinking, I might try my hand again. However, there's no one remotely possible where she lives in this little small village. So Lena comes up with the idea that they'll switch places, and her grandma can go live in London in her flat with all her roommates, and she will go take her grandmother's place in Yorkshire and, well, fulfill her community responsibilities and relax and take some time off. Well, let's just say that neither one of them get quite what they expected, but both of them get just what they need. And this book is not only super cozy and super romantic, but also it has very strong elements of found family and the valuing of individual people for who they are, looking past superficial differences and maybe the prejudiced assumptions we all have so wrongly but so commonly. And this book just leaves you with a very warm, very positive feeling. It's realistic, but so hopeful. And yes, I'm definitely going to go back and get The Flat Share and probably anything else Beth O'Leary has written. All right, category number 4, cozy post-apocalyptic. I know, right? I love post-apocalyptic, but how can post-apocalyptic be cozy? But it can. So the first is a 4-book series called The Bunker Books by Jordan Rivet. Now, I stumbled into this series on KU this past summer and read them one right after the other and enjoyed them. This is a YA series, but not YA focused on romance, YA focused on the events that are happening. And the event that happens is a meteorite is coming to hit, but we know about it in advance. So the science has just developed enough to where cryosleep is possible for 200 years. And the scientists hopefully believe that the 200 years will be enough time for the world, the atmosphere, to be livable for the humans that survive by going into cryosleep. And they choose almost all young people, healthy young people, to go forward and start the human race over again. And so, you have that lead in, but then the rest of that first book and all the following 3 books deal with the aftermath. How does society start over? What kind of world will these young people be facing? And how many of them do survive and how will they interact? What will they choose to do as they go forward? So it's very interesting, fun, quick read, and I really enjoyed it. Now, the second cozy post-apocalyptic series that I discovered actually came to me as a recommendation from Tammy at Believe in Yourself. And I'll put a link to her channel in the description below. But she talked about this book and I thought, I've never heard of that book. That sounds like a book I need to read. So I immediately got it and did. And boy, was I glad. I don't know how this wasn't on my radar before, but Life as We Know It by Susan Beth Pfeffer. Now, this is actually the first book in a 4-book series, and this was so cozy. So this first book is centered on Miranda. She is a high school girl about to go into her junior year, and she and her family are who we see throughout this book. You know how the media and everyone gets talking very excitedly when we're about to have an event like a lunar eclipse and we get told, oh, on this night at this time, it'll be the most visible in this part of the sky and all of that. Well, that's what's happening here. So people are told that there's going to be this meteorite coming that actually impacts the moon and that's not really that big of a deal. I mean, it is. It's going to be really fun to watch. Now, the one criticism I have seen lobbed at this book is that the science isn't accurate, that if what happened in this book actually happened in real life, that would be the end of everything, or it couldn't happen. I mean, I do love science, and oftentimes I want the absolute most accurate, most up-to-date science research there is. But in a book like this one, where the focus is actually on what happens afterwards, I'm not really that interested in, could this really happen, and what would the actual effects be? But anyway, what they were told is going to happen is that a meteorite was going to impact the moon, as it has done in ages past, such that it has created all these craters on the moon. But what actually ends up happening is that the meteorite, when it hits the moon, it causes much more of a impact than they thought it would, and the moon is shoved closer to the Earth. And of course, this affects so much tidal waves and weather all over. And so very quickly, things begin to change. Within a week even, it's drastically different there. And so this book focuses on the survival of Miranda and her family, her single mother, her college-age brother who comes home to be with them before things get really bad, and her younger brother who I believe is 13. And I loved all the characters in this book. Very well developed, but a very realistic portrayal of family life. The mom is very resourceful, and in the few days they have before everything goes completely insane, she guides them into raiding all the stores in the area and getting what she thinks they will need to survive. And then they hunker down in their home and survive. Not only trying to physically survive, but to mentally and emotionally deal with being this isolated and this dejected. Amazingly, though, there is a lot of warm family time here, games played and books read aloud, and it just had a feel like I never would have thought it could. And I very much enjoyed this cozy post-apocalyptic book. Now, I've been told and have read some reviews that have let me know that books 2, 3, and 4 are not quite as cozy as book 1. So it would be up to you if you continued with the series. But book 1, definitely a cozy read for this winter. All right, sticking with a subgenre of science fiction, category number 5 is cozy time travel. I love time travel books, and I have read many, many of them. But I did find on KU a cozy time travel novella by Karen McQuestion, and it was called A Time Travel Christmas. Now, I tell you in advance that this is super cozy. It is a book you definitely have to suspend your disbelief over. Now, you always have to do that with time travel in most of science fiction, right? For a novella, it's short, so you can do it, trust me. And I think it's worth it because this book, A Time Travel Christmas, is not a romance. It is just a family Christmas time travel. So the protagonist has just experienced the death of her grandmother, and she and her parents are very sad about that, obviously, but especially so because it's Christmas time. But then something happened to change all that. Sort of reminded me a little bit of the angel in It's a Wonderful Life. But the majority of this novella is spent in the past, where the protagonist gets to spend time with her grandmother again, although the grandmother is at this point just a child. And it's very sweet, very lovely read, very comfy. And again, suspending your disbelief, the ending is super nice and definitely worth a cozy read this Christmas if that's what you're in the mood for. Now, category number 6 is cozy witchy books. And I have to recommend the Practical Magic series by Alice Hoffman for this category because it's just so good. Now, most people have seen the movie Practical Magic with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman. And it was definitely a cozy movie, although there were some elements in there that were a little bit out there. The books, much cozier, and everything is fleshed out so much more. The character development, so much deeper. The relationships, the history, just everything. If you like witchy books, this whole series is a very cozy read. And it is exceedingly fun to explore this family so much more. Going back to the prequel with the Maria Owens character that you see at the very beginning of the movie Practical Magic and how the curse of the family started, to the sequels to the movie where you find out, do they ever break the curse and how does that happen? So the last category, category number 7, before I do the blended genres, it is cozy classics. Now, we all have our favorite classics. Now, in a way, a lot of books that you read when you were younger do bring up that comforting, relaxing, warm feeling that means it's cozy. So any classic books that you read that give you that feeling would qualify as a cozy classic. For me, there are 2 authors that stand out in this way. One of them is Agatha Christie. Now, yes, Agatha Christie is technically a mystery writer, but she didn't write cozy mysteries in the sense that we use that term now. I think in many ways, her stories are much deeper than most current cozy mysteries. So I've got this collection of Miss Marple mysteries, all short stories, all perfect, I think, for this holiday season. Now, the second author whose books represent cozy classics to me and bring me that feeling of comfort and warmth on a cold winter's day is Louisa May Alcott. And her book, Little Women, is the perfect cozy classic to read any time of year, but especially right now. Just look at this cover. What can I add about Little Women? If you haven't read it before, you need to read it. And if you have read it, you can't reread it too many times. It will almost always make you feel good, even if you just dip in and out of it. If you want to reread your favorite chapters, try it off with that Christmas setting. Yeah, you can't really go wrong with Little Women. Now it's time for the genre blends. And first I have 2 series for you that are set in Victorian England and really do a good job at making you feel that setting, all the history of the Victorian period. In addition to their Victorian setting, they both also feature romance and mystery. One of them more strongly romance, one of them more strongly mystery. So this is the Dear Miss Hermione mystery series by Anastasia Hastings, and this is the first book of Manners and Murder. There's also a second book out already of Hoaxes and Homicides, and I just love these covers, and I love the stories. Let me read you the synopsis of the first book. 1885, London, England. When Violet's Aunt Adelia decides to abscond with her newest paramour, she leaves behind her 2 volatile nieces, 1 dedicated housekeeper, and a mailbox full of trouble. After years of penning the replies of the most popular agony aunt in London, Miss Hermione, Adelia is giving up her authorial pursuits to go all in on love. Unfortunately for her elder niece Violet, Adelia has left the fate of Miss Hermione's letter-answering column in her hands. The first letter Violet receives is from Ivy Armstrong, who apparently fears for her very life. When Violet visits the village where the letters were posted, she finds nothing is as it seems. With a sassy, snobbish sister to take care of, a murder to solve, and her own complicated feelings for a certain caddish Eli Marsh to corral, Violet is almost too busy to dole out advice to the British. But she quickly discovers that when you represent the best-loved agony aunt in Britain, both marauding husbands and murder are par for the course. I thought the author did a really good job with the Victorian setting of these books, as well as with the relationships that she develops within the books. The character of the protagonist, Violet, is extremely well done, and she is not a young woman like you usually find in this time period. Her sister also completely different, but also well done. I will say that at the beginning of this book, when the future love interest, we presume, Eli Marsh, is introduced, I didn't like him at all, but I soon discovered I had misjudged him and I grew to like him. So I definitely recommend the Dear Miss Hermione books for anyone who loves Victorian history, mystery, romance blends that are certainly very cozy. Now, the other Victorian history, mystery, romance series that I recommend is the Countess of Harley series. This series is by Diane Freeman, and the first book is A Lady's Guide to Etiquette and Murder. The seventh book, the most recent, is An Art Lover's Guide to Paris and Murder. Now, the eighth book is coming out next year, and I foresee this series going on quite a while. I did binge this series this past summer. At that time, it was on KU. I don't think it is now. So if you can get your hands on it through the library, very quick reads, a lot of humor. The couple in it is just very enjoyable to read about, and I had a lot of fun with this series. It focuses more on the romance, and the mystery is the subplot, whereas the Miss Hermione focuses more on the mystery with the romance being the subplot. So take your pick. They are both very cozy. I feel like I have saved one of the best for last here. This other genre blend series I have for you is so unusual, and it has very interesting titles too. The first one is The Mimicking of Known Successes, and book 2, The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles. Now, these books are by Malka Older, and she is a great writer, and they're a blend of sci-fi, mystery, and sapphic romance. The series is known as The Investigations of Massa and Pleiade, and this is what they're about. On a remote gas-wreathed outpost of a human colony on Jupiter, a man goes missing. The enigmatic investigator Massa follows his trail to Valdegeld, home to the colony's erudite university, and Massa's former girlfriend, a scholar of Earth's pre-collapse ecosystems. Pleiade has dedicated her career to aiding the larger effort towards a possible return to Earth. When Massa shows up without warning to request Pleiade's assistance in her latest investigation, the two embark on a twisting path in which the future of rebuilding Earth is at stake, and perhaps a new future together. I have loved these books. They're very short, but so well written. And there's a third one coming out soon. The Potency of Ungovernable Impulses comes out in June, and you can bet I've already pre-ordered it because that's how good this cozy sci-fi mystery romance series is. So that's all 8 categories for you. So many cozy books that I've enjoyed and that I can't wait to keep reading or reread, and that I hope you will give a chance too. So remember, I have 2 more videos coming soon on categories 9 and 10, cozy nonfiction and cozy Christmas reads. I'm really looking forward to sharing all those books with you too. Some really great ones in there that I love. Wherever you are, I hope you're enjoying December. All the lovely traditions if you celebrate, all the wonderful decorations and the delicious baking, and of course, all the cozy books. So until next time, happy reading and happy holidays.